I compare my life with 3 trees. The first tree was in Germany. It was only 4 years of age, and it never carried any leaves or any fruits. Then I spent the next 17 years in Holland, and that tree was older and it grew faster, but it only had leaves on it. And I came to this country in 1955, so I've been here a long time. I feel totally Americanized, and my tree has grown and bloomed and carried fruit. After I was born, I was told by my mother that she wished she would never have given birth to me because times were very bad. Hitler had just come to power, and to have another baby and child in the family was a tremendous burden. And she made me welcome, of course, but she said that times were tough. We lived in a very beautiful home, 6,000 square feet, and my mother had all the luxuries in the world. She had a maid for the heavy work, a maid for the light work. She had a governess for the children. I was the last of 4 siblings, and I had 2 sisters and 1 brother, and there was a difference of age between my 2 oldest ones, which were twins, Martin and Rose, of 9 years, and between my sister Edith and I was 7 years. So in 1933, Hitler came to power. 1934, I was born, and I remember from the earliest days that my father would spend a lot of time at night, especially playing cards with his friends in the front room. I still see him sitting there in his white shirt without a collar. At that time, the collars were removable from the shirt, and smoking cigars with about 10 other guys sitting around the table and playing a game named Skat, S-K-A-T, or Whist. Whist is part of like bridge. And we kids were allowed to come into the front room and say hello to everybody and then out. And my next memory was that as I was kind of a crybaby and I got into trouble, my parents would put me in the basement, which was, if you walk into the front door to the right, the basement was there, and we had a peat cellar there, and I would get into the peat and I would be crying and I would be covered in peat, and after 10 or 15 minutes they would let me come out, okay? And they had to clean me up. My next remembrance was that my father was a farmer and a cattle dealer, and he would buy old skinny cows in the spring and put them in the pasture and sell them in the fall as good heavy cows, and that's how he made his money. And he was he was one of the largest cattle dealers in Germany. He averaged 400 cattle a week, okay? And they were all sold or bought individually. Okay, he would go at 4 o'clock in the morning, he would leave in his Mercedes. I remember his Mercedes because I have a picture of it. It was a 1934 Mercedes, and I stood in front of it, and sometimes I was allowed to start it, and I would climb inside it and make sure that the shifting was in neutral, and then climb on the floor and push the starter button, you know. And I maybe I've done that once or twice, but I remember like I've done it many times. Anyway, that's a story about my dad. He was good. He could look at a cow and estimate the cow at within 10 pounds clean on the hoof while the cow was alive. And he was known throughout as the man to ask how much does a cow weigh. He also had a fabulous reputation of being honest. He had a wonderful reputation which he passed on to his children and which I passed on to my kids, because honesty is something that goes a long way, and it's your reputation that really counts. Anyway, his father and his grandfather both came from Holland, from the province of Groningen. They came from Winschoten and Oude Pekela. And during the 1870s, they discovered coal in the southern part of Holland. And they were peat farmers. They would sell the peat on the market and made a living that way. And after they discovered the coal, peat was dead. So they moved to Germany, and they both had very small farms, and they would have maybe 2 or 3 cows. And the parents of my mother, who I remember I remember my grandmother, her name was Rebecca de Vries. She and her husband moved in 1933 to what is then known as Palestine. They had a son there that lived there near Haifa. It's called a place called Yokneam, and it was malaria infested. It used to be a swamp, and the place that they moved into was a hut, no windows, and there was sand on the floor, and but they had the freedom. They saw what was happening in Germany with the Jewish people, and they lived there in very poor circumstances, and my dad supported them financially as much as he could. Okay, it was my uncle Sam Jakobs and the brother-in-law of my father, Sam Lazarus. Okay, and he was hit in the head, and he had a plate in his head after they operated on him. And what happened to him, he ended up, when the Germans started to deport Jews, he ended up in a privileged concentration camp, which was called Theresienstadt in Czechoslovakia at that time. And he was allowed to bring his family, which consisted of his wife and his daughter, who was mentally retarded. And there was one more part in his family, a young man, John, who was 17, who went with the child transport to England, and he joined the British commandos there. And it so happened that in Theresienstadt and in everywhere else, the Germans decreed that the mentally retarded were not fit to live, and so she had to let her daughter of Sam had to be transported to Auschwitz, and her mother wouldn't let her go by herself. She was 14 years of age, and she went with, and she knew that she was going to face certain death. So that answers the question of that. My dad had trouble plying his trade because the Nazis were getting stronger and stronger, and the Jews were not allowed to have any Gentile servants at all anymore. And if you had a store and you had somebody working for you, if they were not Jewish, they could not work there. And we were not allowed to go to any movies, theaters, things like that. but we did not have to wear a star at that time. However, the Nazis got stronger and stronger, and my sister Edith, in her class, she was at that time, in 1936, she was about 8 or 9. She was told by the teacher, who was a Nazi. He came every day to school in his Nazi uniform with a swastika band around his arm, that she had to get out and stay out for a while in the hall, and then he would call her back. And when he called her back after 15 minutes, the kids all lined up on two sides, and my sister Edith had to walk through them, and they were told to spit on her and call her bad names of being a Jew. Okay? And that was her experience. My brother and my other sister, I don't know if they had different experiences. They never talked about it. They probably, maybe not. Not all teachers in the German schools were Nazis. We felt that Hitler rose to power because of the economic situation in Germany, and he was actually an outsider. It was like a Canadian coming into this country and trying to run this country. And because he was from Austria, and he was in the First World War a corporal, and after the war he became a house painter, and he had a bad experience. He met a Jewish prostitute who he felt gave him syphilis. And maybe that's how it started, I don't know. But the main thing is that the reason why the Jews in Germany were prosecuted, it came from an outside area. It came from Russia. In the Russian Revolution of 1917-18, the communists took over from the Tsar. And the Tsar always had a very anti-Jewish control with everything, with the Cossacks and with everything else. That there was a lot of discrimination against the Jews under the Tsar's regime. When the communists took over, they promised everybody equal of religion and opportunity, etc., etc. And a lot of Jewish people joined the Communist Party. And in Germany, the Communist Party and the National Socialist Party were fighting for power. And Rosenberg, who was the minister of Hitler for propaganda, not Goebbels, Rosenberg, said that all Jews were communists, so therefore they had to be erased. And that's how the German people started to hate the Jews. And the Jews were integrated in German life for many hundreds of years. We didn't live in a ghetto. We lived in a part of town where everybody else lived. Our neighbors were Gentile, and we did not walk around with black hats and black coats, so we were not really distinguished or different from anybody else. And we practiced our religion as much as we could. We went to services on either Friday night or Saturday morning, and we celebrated the Jewish holidays. But we knew we lived in a Christian nation, and most German Jews were assimilated to the point where they were more German than Jews. Okay, and that's what cost many of them their lives, because they could not believe that Hitler would turn against them the way he did. And my dad saw the danger One day he was going to settle with a farmer the sale of a cow, and they do that in a restaurant, and they buy each other a shot of whiskey and a cigar, and this man in this Nazi uniform walked in, and he knew my dad was Jewish. He says, "You're not allowed to be here. Get out." And like any cattle dealer, my dad had a cane. And he took his cane and he hit the man right over the head. And he knocked him unconscious. And that was a very dangerous thing to do. And lo and behold, nothing happened after that. This was in the beginning of 1938. And in February of 1938, we finally left. Well, the only way that we were able to get out of Germany, because my dad was only offered 10% of his property and his pastures, was to smuggle gold or jewelry across the border. And my mother's family, she had a green dress on her. And I remember that green dress because it went with in hiding. And I think that's the only thing she ever wore, because that's how I remember her. And it had buttons in the front that were cloth covered. And the way that she brought gold from Germany into Holland for us was with buttons that were covered with cloth, but gold was underneath it. And then on the way back, she would have another set of buttons, and she would put those on her dress. And that's how she kept on moving back and forward, and that's how we got some money out of Germany. Because when we left Germany, we were only allowed officially to take out the 60 German marks for each person in our family. So that meant 60 times 50 marks, 50 marks each. That meant 300 marks together for the whole family. We went to Holland in February of 1938, and we crossed the border at night, or in the evening. And we were searched by border guards that had, I remember, had gray coats on and helmets, and we had to completely take our clothes off, and then, but we were not mistreated per se, and then we could go into Holland, okay, and we all got into my dad's Mercedes, and I don't know if we could take furniture with or not. Well, we moved, when I was in February of 1938, we moved into Holland, into Nijmegen, and we had a very nice house. It was on the, I remember, the Reestraat in Nijmegen, and my uncle Sam and his family, they had 3 boys. They moved in the street behind us, called the Hermelijnstraat. No, I don't remember the numbers, okay? But I remember the name of the streets. Anyway, we were free. We were not considered Jews, but we were considered Germans. But we were not really Germans anymore, because in 1938, Hitler took the citizenship of all Jews, German Jews, away, and we were stateless. Germany declared or invaded. They didn't declare war, they invaded Poland. In 1938, November 38, in Germany was a terrible, terrible happening. The Nazis broke into all the Jewish businesses and destroyed everything, and they burned down the Jewish synagogues all over Germany. okay? And they really established that they wanted to find a solution to the Jewish people, okay? And they did. They found a solution, the concentration camps. Dachau, Auschwitz, to name two, Theresienstadt, which was a privileged camp. There were many camps, and the people around there denied that they ever knew that there were concentration camps. Right? They ever denied that the Jews were deported. They all thought that we went on vacation to Mallorca, and we never came back. And the Germans really have to understand that the older population has a problem, that they are willing and going to deny that they knew what was going to happen to the Jews, okay? And did they know about concentration camps? Of course they did, because their sons were guarding those concentration camps. And don't you think that they would not talk about it, okay? About those damn Jews that they killed so much a day? Okay, they did. So, saying that the Germans didn't know, that's a fallacy. Yeah, in May of 1940, when the Germans invaded Holland, they right away started to decree that the Jews had to wear identification on all their clothes when they went outside, with the word Jew in the Star of David, and it's spelled Jood in Holland, Jood, and which stands for Jew. And we were not allowed to go to schools, public schools. We were not allowed to go to movie theaters, parks, any sport events. When we wanted to go and visit somebody in a different town, we had to go to the police station and get a permit. And so my sisters and my brother went to a special school for Jewish kids, because there were enough of them in that town. So they went ahead with their education somewhat, and I didn't. You know, I was just a freeloader. I walked the streets, and whenever I saw a German officer, or even some German in the Wehrmacht, in the army, I had to get off the street and stand in the gutter with my head bowed. And the only people that really gave us some respect were the Catholic and the Protestant clergy. Every time they saw a Jewish person with a star, they would lift their hat and then nod their head. And no kids to play with, okay? Nobody wanted to play with a Jew. So from then on in till August of 1942, my dad prepared and he had a white nightgown on. I still remember it. And planes were coming over, and he said, well, the Germans are invading Holland. We didn't know that they were going to go to Rotterdam and bomb them, okay? We didn't know anything about that. The Dutch army capitulated after 4 days. You know, they didn't have the manpower, nor did they have the equipment to fight the German army. The German army was a well-oiled machine. Absolutely. They were very strong. They were very well organized, and from what I heard, they were good fighters. Okay, and so the Dutch were overwhelmed. So was Belgium. So was France. So was Denmark. So was Norway. They appointed right away a civilian administrator to handle Jewish affairs, and his name was Seyss-Inquart. Anyway, he was a bastard. He hated the Jews. And he did everything in his power to get rid of the Jews. And he worked through the Jewish Council, it was called. The Jewish Council was a collection of very, very well-to-do and important Jews in Holland, mainly in Amsterdam, who had a list of all the Jewish people throughout, throughout Holland, okay? If they came in from Germany or if they were Dutch, it didn't matter. Everybody knew where Jewish family was. And they had to deliver approximately 5,000 families a month in order to satisfy the Germans, to satisfy Seyss-Inquart. And he told them, the Jewish Council was told that nothing would happen to them. Well, some of my dad's friends, I remember one, Herman de Levy, my dad, he was called to report for a labor camp in Germany, and my dad told him, don't go, because you'll never come back. He went anyway. He wrote a letter to his family after 6 weeks, said everything is just fine with me, and I wish you would follow us. Because when you take the head of a household away at that time, the family becomes leaderless. And the family followed, and they never came back. They were all ended up in a concentration camp. And in February again of 1942, my dad decided that it was time to go look for a hiding place, and he started to prepare for it. And my mother made a lot of preparations for it, like clothing and things like that, and blankets. Well, apparently my sisters helped her as much as they could, okay? They were very willing and able, and all the circumstances had changed because we came from a family that was established to a family that moved into another country, different languages. My parents still spoke German, they spoke German, but because they were close to the border, they could speak, they also spoke what is called some type of Low Dutch, okay? And we made a degree with 4 siblings that we were not allowed to speak one word of that hated language in our country, in our house. And therefore, every time my mother and father would speak German, it would cost them a penny, okay? And within half a year, they spoke Dutch, okay? And for me, it was a hated language for many years. And my dad would not speak German for many, many years, even afterwards. And it was something that when my dad bought his car in 1949, he got a Mercedes. And the Jewish population in Holland, in Nijmegen, which were left over, about 10 people, said, Jakobs, how can you drive a German car? How can you drive a Mercedes? And you know what the answer was of my dad? He said, if Hitler would see a Jew drive a Mercedes, he would turn around in his grave. He said, and I love Mercedes. The Diesens offered to hide us for 3 months, okay? And we brought some preparation things over there, like blankets and whatever, but we couldn't do too much because everybody was watching everybody. You know, the neighbors, if they see you leave with a suitcase, right away they think there's something going on. So this started going, and the family Driesen decided that we could stay there for 3 months. That's all. And my dad gave him all his cows and his pastures, and in exchange. And when the 3 months went up, we had to pay. And my dad, through a confident friend of his, who came back every month to visit us, who brought enough gold coins for the farmer to be satisfied with us staying. And the 3 months turned into 25 months. On the evening of August of 26th, 1942, a Dutch policeman came to our house and warned my dad that he had to report the next day for labor camp for Germany. And he decided at that time that it was time for us to leave. And my mother and my sister Edith left for our hiding place in Beek by train, and that same night. And my sister Rosa went to a place in Nijmegen. We were in Zettergenbos, Den Bosch at the time, and we were living in Moliestraat. And my sister Rosa went to live and hide with my dad's brother Sam and his 3 sons and wife at the family Hinrichs in Nijmegen. And my brother Martin went to hide across the street in the Moliestraat with the family at Dexterhuis. He was a mailman, and he was a good Dutchman, and he never took a penny for hiding my brother during the war. And my brother was there for a long time, I think till April of 1945. So the next day, my dad and I took off our insignia of being a Jew, of our clothes, and we went to the train station at 6 o'clock in the morning, and we walked because we didn't have any other transportation, and we waited for the train, and we saw on the other side of the station hundreds of Jewish men lined up with a little suitcase to go to labor camps. And my dad said, don't pay any attention to them. And so we hopped on the train from Zettergenbos to Nijmegen, and from the Nijmegen train station we took a streetcar to, it's called the Huner Park. I think that Don knows where that is, close to the bridge over the river Wall. And we had to wait there for a while for a transfer, and my dad said, let's go into this park and just walk around. And I told him, I said, we cannot do that because we're Jews, and if somebody recognizes we're in trouble. There was a big sign up there, forbidden for Jews. And he said, today we're not Jewish, okay? So don't worry about it. So we walked through the park, and we made the train, the streetcar to Bergendal, which stopped just short of the hotel. And we got out, and we walked down the hill, and my dad says, you see that house there with the flat roof? I said, yes, I do. He said, well, we're going to drink a glass of milk there. I said, that's great. It was the longest glass of milk. And that's where we spent the next 25 months in an area that I would say is smaller than this room, okay? First, we spent it with 4 people. My sister Rosa joined us 8 months later because it became too dangerous for her to be in Nijmegen next to the hotel where she was in hiding, because the hotel was occupied by Germans, and the family Hinrichs that hid my sister, and the family Sam Jakobs, who had 3 sons and his wife, and they had 2 daughters, the family Henrys, beautiful girls. And of course the Germans came over and wanted to date them, you know? Soldiers are soldiers, men are men. And so it became too hot for my sister, and she came over to our hiding place in Beek. And so we were with 5 of us. My dad made a deal with the old man Driesen that they would hide us for 3 months. That was it. And in exchange, he would get all the cows that my dad had. Fine and dandy. So they lived downstairs. They had one son, Leo, who smuggled across the border butter and whatever they could get their hands on. And they were known as very pro-German, which was good for us. And on the other side of the house lived their daughter, who got married and had a little child, and her husband's name was Gert, and he was a contractor, and he was a hothead, and he was afraid that because there were Jews in the house, that it would risk the family safety, and he wanted us to leave. And his mother, Annie Janssen, who was the mother of Henk Janssen, who you talked to, who's now a priest, she prevented that. She said, those people stay here with us, okay? And that's it. And he reluctantly went along with her. Okay. And the 3 months turned into 25 months. And how did my dad manage that with the Driesen family? He said, we'll pay you. Every month we'll pay you the equivalent in gold of $400, which was a lot of money at that time. And how did he get the money? He had a very good friend. His name was John Cruz, and who lived near Nijmegen, and who brought every month, he brought us the money for that 1 month, okay? And he also told us that we could get help from the Dutch underground for food and other things. And my dad says, no, we do not want the Dutch underground to know where we are, because in case they get caught and tortured, they will talk. And then we are being picked up. And he said, I don't want anybody else to know. And so that's how we survived 25 months, because of my dad being a wise man and because he had the money. Otherwise, we would have been on the street. We got up in the morning and we washed ourselves. We had a little basin and a little rag and no soap. And so when water was sufficient, we washed ourselves and our body. I don't think that I ever washed my body, but my arms and my face, that was it. No toothpaste, no toothbrushes, and I mentioned already we had no soap. And how did we live the rest of the day? Well, my wonderful sisters taught me how to read and to write and arithmetic, and they taught me some of history and geography, and they especially pressured me on proper reading, because they were taking shorthand while I was reading. And so it served a twofold purpose. And my mother would knit, I don't know what, but sometimes we took potato bags and unraveled them, and then the girls and my mother would make shoes and handbags out of that. So we had something to wear. And my dad would sit in the corner, in that corner there, and with his little coffee grinder, and he would grind oatmeal for us to eat, because that's what we ate every day. Oatmeal in the morning. And in the afternoon we had some potatoes and onions. Okay? And they were prepared for us downstairs because we had no oven. But onions today, it took me 30 years before I started using oatmeal again. Now I have everyday oatmeal. You know, potatoes I love. A lot of butter and sour cream. And onions, I eat boiled onions and cooked onions, but I cannot and I will not eat raw onions. I would starve, I'd rather starve, which would be a means of losing weight, you know, but I will not touch onions. We made games like Monopoly, and we made a checkerboard, because I had to play checkers every week for 3 days in a row. 3 days in a row every week. I would go downstairs and play with, we called him Vat Driesen, abbreviation of father, okay? And I always called him Mr. Driesen. And his wife called him Vat. Anyway, to play checkers. And my dad told me, he said, as good as you are in checkers, and I was good. That's one of the few things that I know that I'm good at. You're not allowed to win, not one time, and you're not allowed to show that you lose on purpose. Well, I was 8, 9 years of age, and I figured, well, I can do that, you know, and I did it. And if somebody gives you a task to do, right, and the security of your family depends on it, you do it. And he said, our life will depend on it. If you win, Mr. Driesen might get upset and he might tell us to leave. So it's up to you to do what I'm asking you to do. And I did it. And I feel I always came in second, you know? And so I'm not a loser, you know? Second is not bad. Anyway, one day we were playing checkers with Mr. Driesen, and the door opened. And I didn't know who it was. So I dove behind a large armchair that was sitting in the corner, and I sat there for 2 hours. And the girl that was working for a doctor next door had come over to visit, you know, for a cup of coffee. That's how people in Holland do it, for a cup of coffee and a cookie. And the way they do it with the cookies is they give you the cookie box, and you can take one, and then they take it away, and they won't show it anymore. Anyway, she stayed there for 2 hours, and I stayed behind that chair for 2 hours. I didn't move. I did not dare to breathe in case she would find out that there was somebody else in that room. And when people were visiting downstairs and we were upstairs, we had to be very quiet, like a mouse. And we always knew that there was somebody there to visit because the dog would bark. And we would sit still or lie. We slept on straw, which wasn't bad, you know, you get used to it, except for the mice. And so in the winter we had no heat at all. In the summers weren't too bad in Holland, okay? The temperature gets up to maybe 72, 73, so it's not bad. But in the winter it got really cold, and if there was a Siberian cold, it would go to 10 degrees below zero. And 3 times while we were there, the house was searched by the German police. And they never went up the rickety ladder to look for the hidden compartment. They always went to the other side of the house that you see on the right side. There was a stair going up, okay? And where we were was a hidden compartment. He said, hey, there's nothing there. And at that time we were also, of course, very quiet and not moving and not barely breathing. So that's how we spent our time, and my dad and I had a map. We had two maps, one from the Western Front and one from the Eastern Front. And so we knew from the newspapers that the Dresens were getting, which were German controlled, where the German troops were. And then D-Day started, and it was for us like the beginning of the liberation, you know. And my dad said, hey, we'll be liberated soon. And so then we got no food anymore for the last 2 weeks. And the only thing that was available to us was bacon, and some meat that we found later on was cat meat. And I ate both. And I loved the taste of bacon. And I still do. And I don't eat any more cat meat. So that's how our hiding started. In 1942, I was 8 years of age.
Well, I grew up in Johnstown, and 1942, I graduated from high school, and at that time, that was being born right into the middle of the war years. What what happened that the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor in '41 and all that stuff. So it was a apparent duty of any good physical fit individual to join the military. Well, the story that I had, that a lot of people maybe don't believe this, but I had owned a little 29 Chevrolet, had a rumble seat and the visor over the windshield, put the top down, and I had one of their U.S. Marines, U.S. Navy. So when I wanted to enlist in the military, I went over to the Marine Corps and to enlist, and they wouldn't take me because I had one too many teeth pulled. I was really upset, so I then went over to the Navy. They told me the same thing. That was in September. In November, October, late October, around the 1st of November, a buddy of mine dared me to join the paratroopers with him, and so we went over to Columbus, went through the physical, and as we were going through the physical, the man said, I was telling him about, we wanted to join the airborne, and we passed everything. So I was telling him about, about what happened. And I said, well, I went to the Marine Corps, and they wouldn't take me, and because I had too many teeth pulled in the Navy. And he says, can you eat steak? And I said, yes. And the nice thing about that, I tell everybody, I still got them. They're not pretty, but I still got the teeth that I went into the service with. Anyway, that's a little side story. But anyway, there was 9 of us. That it took back in those days to get into the airborne, and I have it in the books that I have. It took over 2,400 recruits to make 130 paratroopers. So there was 9 of us enlisted at Fort Hays there in Columbus, Ohio. They boarded us on a train, and on the way to Camp Dakota, Georgia, we stopped at different military camps and did other examinations and test you for colorblind and all that stuff. And by the time we got to Camp Dakota, Georgia, it was just Paul Potter and I, the 2 of us that had enlisted together. The others were washed out. Well, we stayed in Camp Dakota, Georgia, and then in November of 1942, we was moved to Camp Blanding, Florida, and became part of the 508 Parachute Infantry Regiment. We weren't paratroopers at that time. It was basic training. We learned judo. We run a lot, field trials. I could tell you so many stories about what the basic was. It was not easy because back in those days, paratrooper training was just absolutely very, very tough. Many of the guys washed out of even basic training. They wanted to transfer it out. They didn't want to stay in airborne. Well, a little side story was that this one time, I never took too many passes to town. With any money I got, I usually just sent home to my parents because I know they needed it. But anyway, one day I got the German measles in camp, and I'd never been out of camp. They sent me to the hospital on the camp, on the base, and I was on one floor, and I was in there 4 or 5 days, and one of my buddies come over and looked in the window and says, "Hey, Jake," he says, "we're moving out today." I said, "Oh, you are?" And he said, "Yeah." So I run up to the nurse's station. I said, "I got to go. I'm leaving." He says, "Well, you can't leave." And I said, "Well, I am." So I come back, crawled out the window, had just had my old pajamas and things on, run over to the company street. Old Sergeant Slagle see me and said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "Well, you guys are not going anywhere without me." So that's how I stayed in the 508. From there, I went to Fort Benning, Georgia. We had to pack our own chutes, then jump them. Now remember, at that time we're 18, 19 years old, so we very carefully pack our own chutes. We'd go and jump them, and after you jump them, you take them back, put them into the drying shed, hang up your chute, then repack them and jump them again. We had to do that 5 times to qualify as a paratrooper. Well, I made it okay, and when I made my 5th one, then we were supposed to have a furlough home. Well, instead of taking a furlough home, I decided I was going to take demolition school, which is working with high explosives. I did compass school. I did airplane identification. I wanted to learn everything I could about being in the military so I could protect myself. Well, from there, I went home on 1 furlough. So in the 3 years I was in the service, I had 1 furlough home for 7 days. I came back, and we were at Camp McCall, North Carolina, and we trained in the swamps, and even when we were at Benning, we trained in the Chattahoochee River, the Okefenokee Swamp, getting around the alligators and all. And anyway, when we got into Camp McCall, we was training and getting ready to go to where we thought we was going to go, to the Pacific. Well, in December of 1943, they moved us to Camp Shanks, New York, give us different uniforms, each of the different uniforms, and we were shipped on the 23rd of December 1943. We were shipped overseas, and we landed in Belfast, Ireland. Belfast, Ireland, we trained there for a little bit, but it'd be dark up until about 10 o'clock. Well, anyway, from Belfast, from Northern Ireland, then we, because of the daylight hours, we didn't have much daylight. We moved from there to Nottingham, England, and Moulton Park, and we got there in March of 1944. Well, we took our advanced training there, and we had some exhibition jumps and practice jumps, and next thing we know, we found out they loaded us up on trucks. They took us into a base camp. It was all fenced in, and for 2 weeks we stayed in this Langley Air Force Base camp, and then we were told that we were going to be going into combat into Normandy. Well, we learned the sand tables. They taught us the sand tables, identification marks, landmarks, and things in Normandy. So we lined up on the night of June the 4th. We were all ready to go, and it rained us out, and we didn't go. Same thing happened on the night of June the 5th, and about 9:30, we heard the phone ring in the hangar, and they said it's on. So we boarded the C-47s, and about, I would say, close to 10 o'clock in the evening, and we took off for Normandy. Well, during the course of flying over, I had eaten a lot of donuts and coffee, and I got air sick. So I got up, hooked up my static line, and I stood in the door. It'd be foggy and cloudy and then clear, and you could see all these ships going across down on the channel. Now the flight of our flight was one C-47 here and two on the side. Well, the next thing you know, when they got into the fog with no radar and everything, they began to get separated. Planes got separated. And when we flew over Guernsey Island, the anti-aircraft fire began to come up. Some of our planes got shot down, and we turned back across the Cherbourg Peninsula, and at about 500 feet, we got to go ahead to jump. When I went out of the plane, I could look down, and the tracers were coming up, and I noticed some went through my chute. But I could look, and I could see all this water. It flooded all the land with water. And I began to guide my parachute away from the water as much as we can, because we weighed around 300 and some pounds with all of our equipment on. And in the process of doing that, when I was pulling, all at once I landed in a tree in this small churchyard. I'm hanging about 8 to 10 feet above the ground, so I grabbed my trench knife, and because we didn't have the quick release, we couldn't get all them buckles, so I cut the straps and jumped to the ground and ran over into a hedgerow. And they had given these clickers to us for identification, like one click to be answered by 2 clicks if it's a friend. Well, I'm sitting there looking all dark, and the planes are going over. I'm in German territory, really. I threw that clicker away. And to this day, it was the best thing I ever done, because you don't sit out there in the dark going click, 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 you know, and you get yourself killed. It was 10 days then after that before I got back to my outfit. And in between was some pretty exciting stories, more we found out on our trip back. Because the little lady that, when I landed in this churchyard, I come around the front of the church. Instead of continuing on to the right, I turned and went the other way, going toward the flight of the planes. And this lady was saying, the interpreter was telling the story, and the lady was saying that she was 14 years old that night when she seen the parachutes come down, and the Germans were in her house and bivouacked all in her area. If I'd have drifted another 100 yards or kept on going, I'd have walked right into them. Now, there's a little details. I don't want to go into all of that stuff, but in the course of being in Normandy, 2 times I'll remember. July the 3rd is when my good buddy got wounded real bad on the crossroad, and July the 4th is when I had my squad. We went into this field and found out we were supposed to attack Hill 95, and there was a Hitler Youth Division on the hill we didn't know about. We went into the field, and of the 24 that was in my group, there was 8 of us got out, and I was one of them. The field was mined. They opened up on us with 88s, machine gun fire mortars, and I can remember Brian Deloach and Belair and Tanner and Vachon and Medford in the line, and I'm still in that group, and I never got touched. Why, I don't know, but I never got touched. Anyway, so after that battle there, we went on to Hay-le-Puy, Preto, Bellefontaine, and fought down almost to Lassay, which is almost across the peninsula from St. Lo. And on July the 13th, we were pulled out of Normandy. And then the 130 men of us that jumped in H Company, there's 39 of us that got out.